It was a rainy afternoon at Heathrow Airport. A young man in his early 30s, with fiery red hair hidden under a cap, a leather jacket, and dark sunglasses, moved through the crowd with determined steps. He carried a worn backpack slung over his shoulder, and although his clothes had that characteristic disheveled look of touring musicians, his presence was imposing. Nobody recognized him immediately. At first glance, he looked like another eccentric guy, maybe just another guitarist. Nobody imagined that this man was Axl Rose, the leader of Guns N' Roses, the most explosive band of the moment. Behind the counter, an employee named Margaret, about 40 years old, with her hair perfectly pulled back in a bun and an impeccable uniform, reviewed passenger documents with cold, calculated efficiency. She had worked for that airline for more than 15 years and prided herself on being able to detect any irregularity from miles away. When she saw that disheveled-looking man approaching, her lips instinctively pursed. She observed how he dragged his feet, how his gaze seemed lost, and how his backpack seemed to contain everything he owned in the world. Margaret had already drawn conclusions before he even opened his mouth. Beside her, another younger employee named Sarah watched the scene with some discomfort, sensing that something wasn't going to end well. The man arrived at the counter and dropped his backpack with a dull thud. "Good morning," he said in a hoarse voice, almost as if he had just woken up. "I need to check in for the flight to New York." Margaret looked him up and down without disguising her disdain. "Do you have your ticket and passport?" she asked with a tone that made it clear she expected anything but valid documents. The man rummaged through the pockets of his leather jacket, pulled out a crumpled passport and a folded paper that looked like it had been through a washing machine. Margaret took both with 2 fingers, as if afraid of catching something, and began to review them. Sarah, the young employee, leaned in discreetly to see the documents as well, and her expression showed surprise when she noticed the type of ticket. The ticket indicated a first-class seat, which seemed absurd to Margaret. She looked again at the man in front of her and then at the ticket. "This says first class," she commented with disbelief, raising her voice slightly so that other nearby employees could hear. "Yes," he responded naturally, not understanding why that was a problem. Margaret narrowed her eyes and exchanged a knowing look with another colleague passing by. "Are you sure this ticket is yours? Because frankly, you don't seem like the type of person who travels in first class." The man looked at her confused, feeling how discomfort began to grow in his chest. "Excuse me? I'm saying," Margaret observed, pointing to his clothes with a dismissive gesture, "that there might be some mistake. These tickets are expensive. Where did you get it? Did you buy it yourself or did someone give it to you?" The question was like a slap. The man took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I bought it, like anyone else," he responded with a firm but controlled voice. Margaret let out a brief, sarcastic laugh that echoed in the counter area. "Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. Look, sir, I need you to explain to me how someone in your situation, let's say, could acquire a first-class ticket. Do you have a receipt, a credit card that matches the name on the ticket?" Margaret's condescending tone was starting to seriously annoy him, but he tried not to lose his patience. "I don't have to explain anything to you. I just need to board my flight. My ticket is valid, and my passport is in order." She shook her head with a mocking smile. "I can't allow you to board until I verify that this ticket isn't fraudulent. I'm going to have to call security." Sarah, the young employee, intervened timidly. "Margaret, maybe we should just verify in the system if—" Margaret cut her off with a severe look. "Sarah, this is none of your business. I'm following protocol. This man clearly can't afford a first-class ticket. Just look at him." Before he could protest, Margaret had already picked up the phone and requested the presence of a security officer. Her voice sounded dramatic, almost theatrical, as if she were reporting a crime in progress. "I need assistance at counter 14. I have a possible case of ticket fraud." Within minutes, 2 uniformed guards arrived at the counter with serious expressions. Margaret explained the situation to them in a sensationalist tone, as if she were detaining a dangerous criminal. "This man has a first-class ticket, but there's clearly something suspicious here. His appearance doesn't match the profile of our first-class passengers. I think we should investigate further before allowing him to board." The officers looked at the man, then at Margaret, and one of them, a guy about 30 years old with a skeptical expression, asked, "What exactly is the problem, ma'am?" Margaret pointed at the man with disdain, making a wide gesture with her hand. Just look at him. Does he look like he can afford a first-class ticket? Look at his clothes, his appearance. Something here doesn't add up. The second officer, younger and apparently less experienced, nodded as if backing Margaret up. The man felt humiliation beginning to flood his chest like a cold wave. Around him, other passengers were starting to stop and watch the scene. Some took out their phones to record, others simply watched with morbid curiosity, whispering among themselves and pointing discreetly. "Listen," he said with a firmer voice, trying to maintain his composure in front of the growing audience. "I haven't done anything wrong. I have a valid ticket and a passport. I just want to board my flight and get to my destination. I don't understand why this is turning into a spectacle." One of the officers extended his hand with authority. "Let me see your passport, sir." The man handed it to him, and the officer opened it to review the information. His eyes stopped on the first page, and his expression changed abruptly. He remained silent for a few seconds, staring at the photo and name. Then, he looked up at the man in front of him, then back at the passport, and his face noticeably paled. His hands began to tremble slightly. "Are you?" he began to ask, but the words got stuck in his throat. The other officer, curious about his colleague's dramatic reaction, approached to see the passport. When his eyes read the name, his jaw literally dropped. He looked at the man in front of him as if he had just seen a ghost. Margaret, impatient and clearly annoyed at not being included in whatever they were seeing, asked with an irritated tone, "Well, is it fake or not? Are we going to arrest him?" The first officer swallowed audibly and returned the passport to the man with trembling hands, almost dropping it in the process. "Mr. Rose, I'm terribly sorry for the confusion. Of course you can board your flight." "I apologize on behalf of the entire airport." Margaret frowned, confused. "Mr. Rose? Who is he? Why are you acting like this?" The officer looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and pity, as if he couldn't believe what she had just done. "It's Axl Rose, the singer from Guns N' Roses." The Axl Rose. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt the ground opening up beneath her feet. Her face went from confusion to horror in a matter of seconds. Blood rushed to her cheeks as she processed the magnitude of her mistake. The passengers who had been watching began to murmur among themselves, some finally recognizing the man in front of them. Several took out their phones and began searching for photos online to confirm. A woman shouted excitedly, "Oh my God, it's him! It's really him!" Axl Rose, the rock legend, was standing in front of her, and she had accused him of being a scammer. Margaret tried to regain her composure, but her voice came out trembling and broken. I didn't know. Mr. Rose, please excuse me. It was a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't mean to offend you." Axl looked at her with a mixture of weariness, disappointment, and some sadness. "A misunderstanding," he repeated quietly, letting the word float in the air. "Or did you simply judge someone by their appearance? Did you decide who deserved respect based on the clothes they were wearing?" She opened her mouth to respond but found no words. The security officers, still embarrassed, apologized again and quickly retreated, clearly wanting to disappear from the scene as soon as possible. Sarah, the young employee who had tried to intervene earlier, quickly approached. "Mr. Rose, please allow me to help you. I deeply apologize for what just happened. This does not represent the values of our airline." Margaret, with trembling hands, took Axl's ticket and began processing it on the computer with clumsy fingers that could barely type correctly. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Rose. It was a terrible mistake on my part. I shouldn't have assumed. I shouldn't have treated you that way. Please, believe me that it was never my intention." Axl raised a hand to stop her, clearly exhausted from the whole situation. "It's done. I just want to check in and forget about this. I want to get to my destination and move on with my life." She nodded repeatedly, almost frantically, while printing his boarding pass. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely tear the paper from the printer. "Here you go, sir. Seat 2 amperes, first class. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to." He took the pass without looking her in the eyes and picked up his backpack. "Thank you," he said dryly, and headed toward security. As he walked away, Margaret stood motionless behind the counter, aware of the reproachful looks from her colleagues and the passengers who had witnessed everything. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, one that would probably cost her her job and her reputation. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment, shaking her head. If you like this story and want to know how it ends, subscribe to the channel and leave us a comment with your opinion. But the story didn't end there. As Axl advanced toward the security area, one of the passengers who had recorded the entire scene uploaded the video to social media with a forceful text. "I just witnessed how they humiliated Axl Rose at the airport just because of his appearance. This is unacceptable." Within hours, the clip went viral. Thousands of people commented indignantly about the treatment Axl Rose had received, harshly criticizing the airline, and in particular, Margaret. Related hashtags began trending worldwide. Screenshots from the video clearly showed the moment when Margaret pointed at him with contempt, the moment when the officers reviewed his passport, and the expression of horror on her face when she realized her mistake. The media didn't take long to echo the news. Television channels, newspapers, and entertainment websites published articles with headlines like "Rock Legend Humiliated at Airport for His Appearance," "An Airline Employee Accuses Axl Rose of Being a Scammer." Morning news programs debated the incident, with panelists divided between those who defended Margaret, arguing she was just doing her job, and those who accused her of flagrant classism and discrimination. Social media exploded with opinions of all kinds. Some users shared their own experiences of discrimination at airports, creating a spontaneous movement of denunciation. The airline, seeing the massive damage to its reputation and thousands of negative mentions on social media, issued an official statement just hours after the incident. The statement, published on all its official platforms, said, "We deeply regret the incident that occurred today at our Heathrow facilities. The behavior shown by our employee does not reflect the values of our company. We are conducting a thorough investigation and will take appropriate measures." Margaret was immediately suspended while the investigation was carried out. Comments on social media were not kind to her. Many accused her of classism and discrimination, pointing out that her attitude reflected a much bigger problem in society, judging people solely by their appearance. Axl, for his part, finally boarded his flight after passing through security without further incidents. He settled into his first-class seat, closed his eyes, and let out a long, deep sigh, trying to leave behind the incident he had just experienced. A flight attendant approached with a glass of champagne and an apology from the captain. "Mr. Rose, the captain wants you to know that he deeply regrets what happened at the counter. The entire cabin crew is dismayed. We hope the rest of your trip is much more pleasant and that this doesn't tarnish your opinion of our airline." Axl accepted the glass with a polite but tired nod. "Thank you, I appreciate the gesture." The flight attendant hesitated a moment before adding, with a genuine smile, "For what it's worth, I'm a huge fan of your music. Welcome to the Jungle is one of my favorite songs. I listen to it every time I need energy." He smiled slightly for the first time in hours. "Thank you, I really appreciate that. It's good to know the music reaches people." During the flight, other first-class passengers recognized him. Some approached timidly to ask for autographs or photos, and he agreed kindly, though clearly tired from everything that had happened. One of them, an executive in an impeccable suit who had witnessed part of the incident from a distance, said, "I'm sorry about what happened down there. It was embarrassing and completely unjustified. You didn't deserve that treatment. Nobody deserves it." Axl shrugged while signing a napkin for another fan. "It's not the first time something like this has happened to me, and it probably won't be the last. People tend to make assumptions based on how you look. It's sad, but it's the reality we live in." The executive nodded thoughtfully, taking a sip of his drink. "Still, it's not right. Let's hope at least it serves for others to learn the lesson. Maybe this incident will make some people reconsider their prejudices." Axl looked out the window, watching the clouds pass by. "I hope so, but changing people's mentality isn't easy. Prejudices are so ingrained that sometimes we don't even realize we have them." Meanwhile, at the airport, Margaret was in the regional manager's office, being questioned about the incident. The manager, a man about 50 years old with a severe expression and a perfectly adjusted tie, had the viral video open on his laptop. He had watched it at least 10 times already, and each time his expression became more serious. "Margaret, this is unacceptable. You not only humiliated a customer, but you did it with someone whose reputation and status are recognized worldwide. Do you understand the gravity of this? Do you understand the damage you've caused to the company's image? She had reddened eyes and a broken voice. I know, sir. I made a terrible mistake. I shouldn't have judged him by his appearance. I was completely wrong, and I deeply regret it. The manager sighed deeply, closing the laptop harder than necessary. Margaret, you've worked here for many years, and until now your record had been impeccable. But this type of behavior cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. You violated our non-discrimination policies and exposed the company to a scandal of international proportions. We're going to have to let you go. The words fell on her like a hammer. She opened her mouth to protest, but knew there was no possible argument. She had ruined her career in a moment of arrogance and prejudice. I understand, she finally murmured, getting up from the chair with trembling legs. I'm truly sorry. The manager accompanied her to the exit of the administrative offices, where she had to turn in her identification, uniform, and belongings from her locker. As she walked through the airport hallways that had been her workplace for 15 years, she felt the stares of her former colleagues piercing her like needles. Everyone knew what had happened. The video had already circulated through the internal employee groups. Some looked at her with pity, others with evident disapproval, and some simply looked away when she passed. Margaret left the building with her head down, knowing that her name would be linked to that incident for a long time, maybe forever. In New York, Axl finally arrived at his hotel after a quiet flight. He checked in without incidents and went up to his room on the 20th floor. He dropped onto the king-size bed and looked at the ceiling, reflecting on the day he'd had. He turned on his phone and saw hundreds of notifications waiting for him. Messages from friends, colleagues, band members, and fans expressing their support and outrage over what had happened. He also saw the viral video. He played it in full, watching the scene from an external perspective. He saw himself standing at the counter, trying to stay calm while being interrogated as if he were a criminal. He saw Margaret's face, full of contempt and prejudice. And then he saw the moment when everything changed, when the officers checked his passport and reality hit her in the face. He turned off the phone and left it on the nightstand. He didn't want to think about it anymore. He just wanted to rest and prepare for the next day's rehearsals. But before falling asleep, he couldn't help thinking about all the people who, like him, are judged daily by their appearance. People who don't have a famous name or a passport to back them up when they're discriminated against. People who simply have to endure the humiliation in silence, without cameras recording, without anyone coming to their defense on social media. And that, he thought as he closed his eyes, was the saddest part of all. He had been lucky that his identity changed the situation, but how many others didn't have that luck? The next day, the story was still trending on all digital platforms. Several artists and celebrities shared the video, expressing their solidarity with Axl and criticizing the culture of judging people by their appearance. Some shared their own similar experiences, demonstrating that this wasn't an isolated case but part of a systemic problem. A well-known rapper tweeted, "Something similar happened to me a few years ago at a luxury hotel. They treated me like I was a criminal just because I was wearing sportswear and gold chains. It's time we stop judging people by how they look and start treating each other with basic respect." A Hollywood actress wrote on Instagram, "Discrimination by appearance is real and harms millions of people every day. Axl Rose shouldn't have gone through that, and no one should ever go through that." The airline, seeing the magnitude of the public relations crisis and the boycott threats that were beginning to circulate, decided to go beyond a simple apology and Margaret's dismissal. They announced at a press conference that they would implement mandatory training programs for all their staff on diversity, inclusion, and elimination of unconscious biases. They also established a new protocol for handling situations where employees had doubts about the validity of a passenger's documents, ensuring that no customer would be publicly humiliated again. The airline's CEO gave a press conference where he declared with a serious expression, "We recognize that we failed to provide the respectful service that all our customers deserve, regardless of how they look or dress. We are committed to making significant and profound changes so that this never happens again in our facilities." Axl, for his part, was contacted by several major media outlets to give interviews about the incident. Initially, he rejected all requests, simply wanting to leave the subject behind and focus on his music. However, after seeing how the conversation expanded and how many people shared their own stories of discrimination, he decided to accept speaking with a journalist from a music magazine that had always treated him with respect. During the interview, conducted in a recording studio in Manhattan, he reflected on what happened with a maturity that surprised the interviewer. "Look, I'm not going to lie, it was frustrating and humiliating in the moment. But it was also a reminder that, despite everything I've achieved in my career, all the records sold and all the stadiums filled, there are still people who see me and only see a disheveled guy. They don't see the music, they don't see decades of work, they don't see anything beyond the surface. And that makes me think about all the people who don't have the luck of having a recognized name to defend them. How many times do they go through things like this or worse and nobody finds out? How many people are discriminated against daily and have to swallow the humiliation because they have no voice?" The journalist nodded, taking notes. "Do you think this incident will change anything on a broader level?" Axl shrugged, thoughtful. "I hope so. I hope at least some people see that video and reconsider their own prejudices. We all have prejudices. It's part of being human. But the important thing is to recognize them, question them, and actively work on them. If this situation makes even one person think twice before judging someone by their appearance, then it was worth going through it. But I'm not going to fool myself thinking that a viral video is going to change centuries of social conditioning. It's a first step, nothing more." The interview was published and also went viral, generating even more conversation on the subject and taking the debate to a deeper level. Weeks later, Margaret was trying to rebuild her life from scratch. She looked for work at other airlines, hotels, anywhere related to customer service, but her name was irredeemably tarnished. Every time she sent a job application, recruiters would Google her name and find the video, the news articles, the forum discussions. Nobody wanted to hire her. She had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with classism and prejudice in the service industry. Finally, after months of unsuccessful searching, she had to accept a job at a call center with a salary that was a fraction of what she earned before. Every day was a constant reminder of her mistake, but it was also an opportunity to reflect deeply on her actions and beliefs. At night, when she returned to her small apartment that she could barely afford, she thought about that moment at the airport. She thought about Axl Rose's face when she accused him of being a scammer. She thought about how her arrogance, her sense of superiority, and her deeply rooted prejudices had destroyed her career and, what was worse, had hurt another person for no valid reason. She began attending therapy to work on her unconscious biases and understand where they came from. Her therapist explained to her how society conditions people to make automatic judgments based on appearance and how she had internalized those messages throughout her life. One day, while browsing the internet looking for resources for her personal healing process, she found a non-profit organization that worked to educate people about the dangers of prejudice and discrimination. After several months of considering it, she volunteered, sharing her own story as a raw and honest example of what not to do. She spoke at high schools, community centers, and corporate events, telling with brutal honesty what she had done and the devastating consequences she had faced both professionally and personally. "I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life," she would say in her talks with a firm voice, but loaded with genuine regret. "I judged someone based solely on their appearance, and that person turned out to be a rock legend. But the most important thing isn't who he was. What's important is that what I did was wrong, no matter who the person in front of me was. It could have been anyone, and my behavior would have been equally unacceptable." Her talks resonated with many people, especially with young people who were beginning to work in customer service industries. Some criticized her harshly in the Q&A sessions, saying she was only seeking to publicly redeem herself or clean her image. Others deeply appreciated her honesty and willingness to admit her mistakes so publicly, something very few people have the courage to do. Margaret knew she could never completely erase what she had done, that the video would be on the internet forever, but at least she could try to prevent others from making the same mistake. Every time she saw someone in the audience nodding with understanding or furiously taking notes, she felt that maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of her terrible mistake. Meanwhile, Axl Rose continued with his life and career as he always had. He gave massive concerts, recorded new music, and continued being the legend he had always been. But that incident at Heathrow Airport remained etched in his memory as a perpetual reminder that no matter who you are, what you've achieved, or how many records you've sold, there will always be people who judge you by what they see on the surface. However, it also reminded him of the importance of using his platform to talk about important issues. In several subsequent interviews, he mentioned the incident not from a place of victimization, but as a starting point for broader discussions about discrimination and prejudice in society. A year after the incident, Axl gave a memorable concert at London's O2 Arena. The tour was completely sold out, and more than 20,000 fans filled the stadium. The energy was electric. During the show, in a moment between songs, while the band took a brief break, he addressed the audience with the microphone in hand. "A year ago, I went through a pretty unpleasant experience at this city's airport. Many of you probably saw the video that went viral. I want you to know something important. I don't hold a grudge against that woman. We all make mistakes. We all have prejudices we need to confront. But I also want you to remember something fundamental. Never judge someone by their appearance. You don't know what that person is going through or who they really are. Give everyone the basic respect they deserve, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to make our way in this crazy world." The crowd erupted in deafening applause that rumbled throughout the stadium. Thousands of people stood up, shouting their support. Axl smiled genuinely, something he didn't do frequently on stage, and began playing the unmistakable opening chords of "Sweet Child O' Mine." The music filled the stadium like a powerful wave, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. All that remained was the music, the magical connection between artist and audience, and the reminder that, despite all the pain and injustice in the world, humanity still had hope. Phones were raised by the thousands, capturing the moment, but this time it wasn't to document an injustice, but to celebrate the music and the message of unity. The incident at Heathrow became a case study in business schools, human resources programs, and corporate training courses around the world. It was used as a perfect example of how unconscious biases can have devastating consequences, both for the person discriminated against, for the discriminator, and for the organization they represent. Companies began taking diversity and inclusion training more seriously, not just as a legal requirement to comply with regulations, but as a fundamental moral necessity and as a smart business strategy. Social psychology professors use the video in their classes to illustrate concepts such as confirmation bias, stereotypes, and systemic discrimination. Sarah, the young employee who had tried to intervene that day, was eventually promoted to supervisor. In her new position, she implemented strict protocols to ensure that no passenger would be treated the way Axl had been treated. Every time she trained new employees, she showed them the video of the incident as part of mandatory training. "This is an example of what should never, under any circumstances, happen at our counter," she would tell them firmly. "All passengers deserve respect, regardless of how they look, how they speak, or what clothes they're wearing. Our job is to facilitate their journey, not judge them." The new employees listened attentively, many feeling uncomfortable watching the public humiliation in the video, but perfectly understanding the point. Months after the incident, a prestigious university contacted Axl to ask him to give a talk on discrimination and prejudice as part of a lecture series on social justice. Initially, he hesitated, feeling more comfortable with a guitar in his hands than with a conference microphone, but he finally accepted. The conference hall was completely filled with students, professors, and community members. Axl went up on stage with his characteristic casual clothes, jeans, and a simple t-shirt, deliberately making a point about appearance. He spoke for almost an hour about his experience, but also about similar experiences he had had throughout his life, long before becoming a rock star. "When I was young, before the fame, before the gold records, people also judged me by how I looked," he recounted with a calm but firm voice. "The difference is that back then, I didn't have a famous name that would instantly change the situation. I had to endure the derogatory comments, the disapproving looks, the doors that closed in my face. And there are millions of people in the world who still live that reality every day. People who are judged by the color of their skin, by their accent, by their zip code, by the way they dress, by a million superficial reasons that have nothing to do with who they really are as human beings. The students listened in absolute silence, some taking notes, others simply absorbed in his words. A student raised her hand during the Q&A session. "Mr. Rose, after everything that happened, do you still trust people? Aren't you afraid of being constantly judged?" Axl thought for a moment before responding. "Of course I still trust people. Most people are good, decent, and don't have malicious intentions. Many of our prejudices are unconscious. We absorb them from society without realizing it. The fear of being judged will always be there, but I can't let that paralyze me or change me. I keep being who I am. I keep dressing how I like. I keep living my life on my own terms. Because if I start changing who I am to avoid others' judgment, then they win and I lose my authenticity." The response generated spontaneous applause in the auditorium. Another student asked, "What would you say to Margaret if you saw her today?" Axl sighed and smiled slightly. "I would probably tell her that I hope she learned from the experience. I don't hold a grudge. We all make mistakes. What's important is what we do after the mistake. If she took that terrible experience and turned it into an opportunity to grow, to question her own prejudices, and to try to do good, then something positive came out of all that. Forgiveness is important, not just for the other person, but for our own peace of mind. Holding on to anger and resentment only hurts yourself." The talk was recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where it accumulated millions of views. The comments were full of people sharing their own experiences of discrimination, but also of people who admitted to having unfairly judged others and who were trying to improve. The video became educational material used in high schools and universities. The impact of the original incident had completely transcended the specific moment at the airport and had become part of a broader cultural conversation about how we treat others and the systems of prejudice we perpetuate, consciously or unconsciously. Margaret, for her part, continued with her volunteer work at the nonprofit organization. After 2 years of talks and community work, the organization offered her a paid position as educational programs coordinator. Her job consisted of developing training materials and giving workshops on unconscious biases. It was ironic, she often thought, that her worst moment had become her purpose. She never worked at an airport again, but she found a way to turn her mistake into something meaningful. Every person who went through one of her workshops and left with a new perspective was a small redemption. She knew she could never fully compensate for what she had done, but at least she was actively trying. One day, while giving a workshop at a technology company, a young participant asked her, "How do you live with the guilt? How do you get up every morning, knowing that your mistake is documented forever on the internet?" Margaret took a moment to consider the question. "It's not easy," she admitted honestly. "There are days when it's very difficult. But I've realized that guilt is only useful if you transform it into action. Guilt that paralyzes you doesn't serve anyone. Guilt that motivates you to make real changes, to help others, to be better. That guilt has purpose. I can't change the past, but I can influence the future." Every person who leaves one of these workshops with a new perspective, every discrimination we potentially prevent, every difficult conversation we facilitate, all of that gives meaning to my mistake. The years passed. The video of the incident remained on the internet, reappearing periodically every time there was a new conversation about discrimination on social media. Some used it as an example, others as a warning. Axl continued making music, filling stadiums around the world, and being the legend he had always been. Margaret continued giving workshops, sharing her story, and working to prevent others from making the same mistake. They never met face to face again, but in a certain sense, their lives were connected forever by that moment at Heathrow Airport. The incident also had a ripple effect on the airline industry in general. Several major companies reviewed and updated their non-discrimination policies. More rigorous training programs were implemented. Confidential hotlines were created for employees to report discriminatory behavior by colleagues without fear of retaliation. Clear protocols were created for handling ambiguous situations without publicly humiliating passengers. It wasn't a perfect or complete change, but it was a step in the right direction. Some veteran employees resisted, arguing that now they had to walk on eggshells. But most recognized that the changes were necessary and should have been implemented long ago. On social media, the incident became a recurring meme, though not the kind that trivialized what happened. Phrases like, "never judge someone by their appearance," "it could be Axl Rose," became common in posts about discrimination. Although Axl initially felt uncomfortable with this meme-fication of his painful experience, he eventually came to see it as something positive. "If a meme makes people think twice before judging someone, I guess that's okay," he commented in an interview with an ironic smile. "I've been turned into memes for worse things throughout my career." 5 years after the incident, a streaming documentary series contacted both Axl and Margaret to participate in an episode about discrimination by appearance. Surprisingly, both accepted, though under the condition that they wouldn't see each other face-to-face during filming. The interviews were conducted separately. Margaret spoke extensively about her upbringing, about how she had developed unconscious prejudices over the years without realizing it, about the devastating moment of recognition when she realized her mistake, and about the long road to redemption she had undertaken since then. Axl spoke about his experience not only at Heathrow, but about years of being judged by his appearance, about how fame changed some dynamics but didn't eliminate the fundamental problem, and about his hope that new generations would be more conscious and less prejudiced. The documentary ended with a powerful message: prejudices are learned, and therefore, they can be unlearned. It requires conscious work, honest reflection, and willingness to confront the uncomfortable parts of ourselves. But it's possible. Both Axl and Margaret, in their own way, represented different sides of this truth. He, the person who refused to change his authenticity to please others' expectations. She, the person who made a terrible mistake and dedicated the rest of her life to making amends. The documentary won several awards and was used as educational material in countless institutions around the world. In one of his last concerts of the decade, Axl played at a small, intimate club in Los Angeles, very different from the massive stadiums he was used to. It was a special show only for lifelong fans. After the concert, while signing autographs at the back exit, a young man approached him nervously. "Mr. Rose, I just wanted to thank you," the kid said with an excited voice. "I'm a musician, and people always judge me by how I look. I have tattoos, piercings, colorful hair. Many people assume things about me before getting to know me. Seeing how you handled what happened at the airport, how you talked about it afterward, gave me strength to keep being myself. So thank you." Axl put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Keep being yourself, brother. People who judge you by your appearance don't deserve to know who you really are. And those who are worth it will see beyond the surface. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to change to be accepted." The young man nodded, with eyes shining with emotion, and walked away with a huge smile. Moments like that, Axl thought as he watched the kid leave, made it all worthwhile. If his painful experience could help even one person feel less alone, then it had served something bigger than himself. Margaret, now in her 50s, continued giving workshops. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional session at a high school, a teenage girl approached her. "Mrs. Margaret," she said shyly, "I just wanted to tell you that I really admire your courage. My mom made a mistake years ago that ruined her career, and she's never been able to get over it. Seeing you, how you took your mistake and turned it into something positive, gives me hope that she can do it too." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "Tell your mom that it's never too late to start over, to make peace with the past and build something better. Mistakes don't define us, but what we do after making them does." If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel for more stories that make you think.